Testing witness 1, level 10. Testing witness mic 2. Testing chair Finkenauer. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Good morning. The subcommittee will come to order. It is a pleasure to have you all here today testifying before our subcommittee this morning. I commend you for your commitment to public service, and I also want to take a minute to thank Ranking Member Mr. Joyce, or Dr. Joyce of Pennsylvania. He introduced himself to me very early on and expressed how important trade and rural development was to his district. I'm glad we share that as a common priority, and I look forward to working with him in a bipartisan fashion on this subcommittee. As someone who grew up in a small town in Iowa, as I like to say, in a town with more cows than people, I'm thrilled to be leading this subcommittee focused on rural development. We have an opportunity to give folks in districts like mine and Ranking Member Joyce's, a seat at the table for the important conversations like the one we're having today on helping farmers and small businesses export their products. It is no secret that for rural entrepreneurs and family farms in states like Iowa, the ability to do business overseas is a key to economic success here at home and in our communities. Trade should help us export goods, but also protect our workers and our communities. However, despite the economic rewards that come with exporting products overseas, only 1% of our nation's 30 million small businesses are able to do so. With 95% of the world's consumers living outside of the United States, this means small businesses are missing out on opportunities to better support their families and communities, create jobs, and expand our economy. Today, we have a chance to hear from some of our nation's leading experts on a federal program that aims to help small businesses enter new markets around the globe. This initiative, the State Trade and Expansion Program, STEP, was initially created in 2010 as a 3-year pilot. 5 years later, Congress enacted the Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Act to make the STEP program permanent and authorize $30 million in funding through fiscal year 20. STEP provides matching funds to states and territories to help small businesses enter new markets, access export financing, and go on trade missions. Since its inception, the Small Business Administration has awarded approximately $139 million in funding to almost every state in the country. In the 2018 annual report, SBA reported that the agency awarded 44 grants totaling $18.9 million in fiscal year 2016. The rate of return was 31 to 1. So for every dollar invested, states reported $31 in sales. STEP has the potential to unlock opportunities in the global marketplace for the small businesses in a town like Maquoketa in my district, whose owners may want to sell products overseas, but could lack the staff capacity or an idea of even where to start. Having said that, the reports and audits conducted by our nation's watchdogs raise some concerns over the implementation of the STEP program and show areas for improvement as we look at the need for reauthorization in 2020. Work by the Government Accountability Office found that SBA lacks a strong process to ensure states are complying with the program's requirements. GAO also found states face serious and ongoing challenges in trying to utilize the funds, with some even giving the funds back. Problems range from short application windows and difficult reporting requirements to a lack of timely communication from SBA. The Inspector General's audits uncovered similar problems and determined more work needs to be done to improve the program's performance measures and oversight. Moreover, the report that SBA is at risk of not fully realizing the potential of the program. We had a chance last week to hear from my office had a chance last week to hear from the Iowa Economic Development Authority about problems in utilizing the funds. In one instance, Iowa was awarded a STEP grant on September 21st, with a start date of September 29th, just 8 days later. In another instance, SBA announced a grant opportunity on April 2nd, only to post a second announcement with new and more accurate information on April 18th. SBA didn't respond to Iowa's questions about the application until April 27th, but the deadline for applying for the STEP grant was May 16th. That's a pretty tight turnaround. While this is frustrating, STEP is a needed initiative. And I look forward to hearing about other states' ideas for improving it and hopefully getting some of our states on record in the future about how we can make this work better. In Congress, we ought to be making it easier for farmers and small businesses to succeed in the international marketplace, not harder, while also protecting our workers. STEP has the potential to help Iowa's entrepreneurs and around the country tap into new markets. If utilized properly, this program stands to provide small businesses with the tools they desperately need to expand, create jobs, and boost wages throughout America, especially in rural areas that, quite frankly, have been ignored for too long. Let me close by saying how grateful I am to have the opportunity to chair this subcommittee. I look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to harness the feedback we received today to make critical and much-needed improvements to the STEP program for all of our communities, small businesses, and hardworking families. I want to thank our witnesses for being here for what I hope will be a productive discussion. I'd like to now yield to the ranking member, Dr. Joyce, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman Finkenauer. Small businesses eyeing international markets face daunting obstacles, such as insufficient manpower, lack of external resources, inadequate access to financing, and clearly bureaucratic red tape. The Small Business Administration, or SBA, is one of the 6 agencies that offer export promotion programs specifically for small businesses. The SBA Office of International Trade, often referred to as OIT, is responsible for a variety of programs that provide training, counseling, and export financing for small businesses. We are here today to review just one unique program within an exceptionally complex network of trade promotion programs. The statutes governing the State Trade Expansion Program, known as STEP, are very specific to ensure each dollar hits its target. Since its creation as a pilot program in 2010, SBA OIT has struggled to comply with STEP's strict legal requirements. One of Congress' most vital roles is not only to exercise fiscal responsibility when spending taxpayer dollars, but also to ensure that the taxpayer dollars we allocate are being spent wisely and reaching their maximum impact. I appreciate the cooperation between all agencies and their commitment to seeing that SBA fulfills its goals relating to this program and maximizes every dollar received to help small businesses reach their potential in the international market. This hearing resumes the committee's oversight of OIT and the STEP program. Our witnesses represent the Government Accountability Office, GAO, and SBA's Office of Inspector General, OIG. They are our eyes and our ears. They're here to present the issues plaguing the STEP program. I am encouraged by the dedication shown by all parties to expanding the opportunities for small businesses and farmers, and I look forward to working with you to achieve our common goal of reducing barriers to small businesses participating in global trade. Thank you again to our distinguished witnesses, and I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Joyce. The gentleman yields back. And if any subcommittee members have an opening statement prepared, we ask that you submit it for the record. I would like to just take a minute to explain the timing rules. Each witness gets 5 minutes to testify, and the members get 5 minutes for questioning. There is a lighting system to assist you. The green light will be on when you begin, and yellow light will come on when you have 1 minute remaining. The red light comes on when you're out of time, and we ask that you stay within the time frame to the best of your ability. I would now like to introduce the witnesses. Our first witness is Ms. Kimberly Giannopoulos. Ms. Giannopoulos serves as the Director for International Trade Issues in the International Affairs and Trade Team at the Government Accountability Office, GAO. She has a distinguished career and has provided leadership on a number of efforts to improve government programs, including contributions to GAO's High Risk Series. Ms. Giannopoulos has also received a number of awards, including a Meritorious Service Award, a Client Service Award, an Assistant Comptroller General's Award, and several Results Throughout Teamwork Awards. Welcome, Ms. Giannopoulos. Our second witness is the Honorable Hannibal Mike Ware, the Inspector General of the Small Business Administration. Mr. Ware was sworn in as the Inspector General of the Small Business Administration in May 2018. He is responsible for independent oversight of SBA's programs and operations, which encompass more than $100 billion in guaranteed loans and nearly $100 billion in federal contracting dollars. Mr. Ware has 28 years of experience within the OIG community and has received numerous awards throughout his career, including several awards from the Council of the Inspector General on Integrity and Efficiency as recognition for his significant work in the Inspector General community. Welcome, Mr. Ware. Ms. Giannopoulos, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairwoman Finkenauer, Ranking Member Joyce, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to be here today to discuss our recent work on SBA's State Trade Expansion Program. As you know, Congress established STEP to help small businesses export. Many states report that STEP is important to their export promotion operations. However, concerns have been raised related to the management of the program, including SBA's processes for administering and monitoring grants and the effectiveness of the program in reaching its goals. My testimony today is based on our report, which is being released at this hearing. Today, I will discuss 2 items. 1, the extent to which SBA's STEP grants management process provides reasonable assurance of compliance with selected requirements of applicable law, and 2, the extent to which SBA has responded to states' challenges in using grant funds. First, we found that SBA does not provide reasonable assurance that STEP grant recipients meet 2 of the 3 Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Act requirements that we reviewed before the grant is closed out. The first requirement states that SBA must limit the amount given to the 10 states with the largest numbers of eligible small businesses. SBA demonstrated reasonable assurance that this first requirement was being met. The second requirement is that states must provide either a 25 or 35% total match to the federal grant amount. We identified 4 instances where, according to SBA's documentation, states didn't report sufficient total matches. Nevertheless, SBA closed these grants. The third requirement is that a state's match cannot be less than 50% cash. SBA collects information about the matching funds, including the proportion provided in cash. However, it does not monitor states' compliance with this requirement. Additionally, SBA considers the salaries of state trade office staff who work on administering the grant to be a form of cash, and most states use staff salaries as their total match, including the required cash portion. SBA does not ensure that states who do this are not also using grant funds from STEP to pay for portions of these salaries. As a result, SBA cannot consistently determine whether states are meeting the cash match requirement. In our report, we recommend that SBA establish a process to ensure documentation of states' compliance with the total match requirement and develop a process to determine states' compliance with the cash match requirement. SBA agreed with these recommendations. Our second finding is related to the overall use of grant funds and the challenges that states report in using their allocations. We found that nearly 20% of grant funds go unused each year, despite SBA officials stating that they seek 100% use of these funds. For example, in 2016, across 41 of the 43 recipient states, combined grant use was about 82%, leaving nearly $3.2 million unused. This includes one state that left nearly 95% of its funds unused that year. SBA made some changes to the program that could improve states' abilities to use all their grant funds, such as extending the fund's usage period to 2 years, allowing certain flexibilities, including travel, and reducing the length of the technical proposal. The 12 states we interviewed cited numerous challenges, including timing of the application and award processes, administrative burden, and communication between the states and SBA. We heard about variable and short application timeframes, inflexible application requirements, a difficult process for repurposing funds, burdensome and changing reporting requirements, and delays and inconsistent communication of requirements from SBA. SBA does not assess and address the risk posed by some states' low use of funds. SBA officials told us that while they informally collect feedback from states, there's no process to collect states' perspectives on challenges with the program. We recommended that SBA assess this risk to achieving program goals posed by some states' low grant fund use rates. We also recommended that SBA enhance collection and sharing of best practices among states. SBA agreed with these recommendations. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Giannopoulos. Mr. Ware, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairwoman Finkenauer, Ranking Member Joyce, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today and for your continued support of the Office of Inspector General. I am proud to represent the dedicated men and women of my office and speak to you about their important work. We've published 3 reports and written 1 management advisory regarding what is now known as the State Trade Expansion Program, or STEP. Across these 3 reports, we made 22 recommendations, all of which are now considered closed. While the STEP program has benefited from congressional scrutiny, OIG oversight, and most recently oversight by my colleagues at GAO, my office has identified systemic risks to SBA's grant management practices that are important in context of today's discussion. Our first STEP review was conducted pursuant to the Small Business Jobs Act of 2010, which authorized SBA to establish a STEP grant program as a 3-year pilot to increase the number of eligible small business concerns in states that export and to increase the export value of those eligible small businesses that already export. In 2015, Congress authorized STEP as a full-fledged program through the Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Act of 2015. Our 2 most recent reports were mandated by the 2015 Act. We conducted our 2012 audit of the pilot program to determine the extent to which the grant recipients were measuring program performance. To achieve our objectives, we reviewed the Small Business Jobs Act of 2010 and the fiscal year 2011 STEP program announcement. We judgmentally selected all STEP grants exceeding $1 million to review. 6 grant recipients met this threshold. We conducted site visits to California, Pennsylvania, Washington, Michigan, and Illinois. We found that STEP grants recipients didn't implement adequate metrics to measure program performance and issued 9 recommendations for corrective action. In addition, SBA granted more than $1 million to an ineligible applicant, the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, which was the subject of our advisory report. In response, Congress included an expanded definition of state in the 2015 Act, which resolved the issue in the advisory. Our second STEP review was performed to determine how STEP funds were used. We requested grant award and expenditure totals from SBA, queried STEP data from usaspending.gov, and selected 15 grant awards totaling $15.2 million. We found that SBA couldn't provide consistent STEP award and expenditure data and did not update usaspending.gov. We did, however, find that SBA implemented new reporting requirements for the fiscal year 2014 STEP program that significantly improved controls over the quality of the grant recipient's performance and financial reports. We issued 3 recommendations based on our review findings. Our final report was also issued pursuant to the 2015 Act authorizing STEP. The objectives of the audit were to determine the extent to which STEP recipients measure program activity performance and the results of those measurements. It is noteworthy that Congress included certain performance measures within the 2015 authorization as a follow-on to our findings that SBA lacked adequate metrics in the pilot stage. We selected 5 cooperative agreement awards totaling $3.9 million, conducted site visits and obtained documentation from recipients in California, North Carolina, Washington, and Mississippi. We also interviewed and obtained documentation from cooperative agreement officials for Illinois. We found SBA has made significant progress in improving the overall management and effectiveness of STEP since our audit of the pilot program in 2012. However, SBA could utilize existing data to further improve its performance measures and program oversight. We issued 6 recommendations based on our review findings. It's safe to say the STEP program has evolved since its inception and has benefited from oversight reviews by my office, GAO, and congressional scrutiny. Nonetheless, our reviews of SBA's grant programs continue to identify systemic issues with SBA's accuracy of grant data for both financial and performance reporting, ineffective oversight, and inadequate standard operating procedures. In our most recently published Most Serious Management and Performance Challenges Facing SBA in fiscal year 2019, we identified grants management as an agency challenge for the first time. SBA officials acknowledge that there are systemic issues with its grant management processes and have documented plans to address them. That said, we will continue to perform reviews and make recommendations for corrective action to promote efficiencies and effectiveness within SBA's grant programs. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ware, and you guys are very good on time. Oh my goodness.
I hit that exactly on the 5-minute mark.
Exactly. Thank you all. We really appreciate everything you all have shared with us, and I'll begin the questioning by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. The first question is for Ms. Giannopoulos. Trade is obviously a priority for me and for the state of Iowa, which is why I'm so pleased that our first hearing is on how small business trade assistant programs can work better for farmers and small businesses, but also our states. Mm-hmm. So Iowa is the #1 export state for corn and pork, and #2 for soybeans, and #2 in the country overall for commodities behind California. Mm-hmm. I'm sure the administration shares this goal as well, so I hope this is a bipartisan issue. For GAO's report, you interviewed 12 states that left at least 25% of their grant funds unused. Why do some states spend all their money while others are struggling to do so?
When we spoke with the states, they gave us a variety of responses as far as the barriers and challenges that they experienced in trying to use some of the grant monies that they received from SBA. I touched on them a little bit in my oral testimony, but they included everything from as you mentioned earlier in your opening statement, Chairwoman, the application deadline. It's not always the same day or the same week every year, so some folks who have very small state trade offices can't plan in advance to dedicate their time to this application process. As you also noted, sometimes things change, the reporting requirements change. In other cases, the states have difficulty in repurposing funds. For example, we heard one story where a state was unable to attend a trade conference overseas because things had changed or certain companies had dropped out, and they had a very difficult time getting those funds repurposed through SBA. So in some cases, it's the timing that works against the states, and in other cases, it has to do with the management of the program itself.
Got it. Thank you. And this question is for Mr. Ware. You also found that grant recipients did not expend all the funds awarded. In response to your findings, SBA enhanced its oversight procedures to ensure that the program managers are monitoring states to ensure they are meeting their quarterly goals. What could SBA do to make it easier for recipients to use funds? Has the appropriations process impacted states' ability to utilize the funds?
I believe that the appropriations process has impacted the state's ability. I mean, the states are on record, as my colleague stated, of discussing the difficulties they have with the short time frame, and it's compounded, of course, when the short time frame is made even shorter. Relative to spending, I think one of the things that SBA did was, after our last audit, though, they increased the period of performance time, which should take some of the pressure off the states in terms of spending. But I caution that does come with its own set of challenges that I could get into, but I'm sure that answers your question. Oh, I hope it does.
Great. Thank you. And I thank both of you for being here. This is, enlightening, and there's clearly a lot that we need to be looking into and doing better. This is a great program, and we need to make sure that it's just implemented and used the way that it should be with our states, and our small businesses are able to get what they need and be able to grow. So I really, again, appreciate it and look forward to ongoing discussion. So with that, I'm going to yield back my time, and the ranking member, Dr. Joyce, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. My first question is for Mr. Ware. The SBA's OIG identified in this truly were systemic issues with the SBA's financial and performance oversight. These grant programs and the elevation of this by this review show that these issues into fiscal year 2019 had management and performance challenges in the report. How do STEP's management issues compare to other SBA grant programs?
Thank you. It goes hand in hand. The difference, the same type of problems we find in STEP, we find in the other programs is basically two things. So it's inaccurate data, and it's not enough oversight or inadequate oversight. And when I say they go together is that those problems are what we find systematically across just about every grants program that we look at, which was the reason why we elevated it to a top management challenge and notified the agency.
Has the SBA Office of Grants Management made any changes based on the recommendations in the report, and how long will it take for this reform to take place?
They have made changes, and I'll give you some of the ways they did. They did the earlier detection in terms of a risk management process by which they visit states based on risk that are not spending on time based on the quarterly reviews of the performance data now. And they also came up with an agency-wide data quality plan that they're supposed to implement across the board on all their grant programs. They provided us with sufficient documentation to prove that they have put those things in place. Our work has not yet, we haven't done the work yet to determine the impact of those changes.
How can Congress monitor SBA implementation progress?
One of the Congress can monitor the implementation progress by the work that both GAO and the Office of Inspector General does in terms of that.
And finally, how will grant management reforms impact the STEP program?
It should impact it significantly, mainly because we want a transparent, well-functioning program that has the right level of oversight on it, and that is providing the type of performance measures data that Congress can use to provide the type of oversight. And I think that based on our work, they have come a long way in terms of that. Like, for example, in the past, they only did the rate of return on investment as the true measurement.
Right.
They've since stepped that up based on our recommendations to provide measures more in line with what the authorizing language asks for.
And will the better management help states use these funds, fully implement the access to these funds?
I believe so, especially in regards to the early detection of states who are struggling to use their funds.
Thank you very much. My next questions are for Ms. Giannopoulos. Your report found that the SBA does not have sufficient processes to ensure that states meet the total and cash match requirements mandated by the statute. Can you explain total and cash match requirements and why they are mandated?
Sure. So the total matching requirement that a state has to meet is 25% of the total amount that they're going to receive. So, for example, if a state was going to spend $100 on export promotion, $75 of that could come from the STEP program, and $25 would come from the state itself. And of that $25, $1,250 would have to be in cash, and the other $1,250 could be either in cash or by some other way, either an indirect or an in-kind contribution, that sort of thing. So that's what TIFTIA, the Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Act, requires when it updated the program and made it a permanent program. So what we found were there were some difficulties that SBA had in not only confirming that that match had been met, but also that the cash match was being met with actual cash. As I explained in my statement, there were some issues having to do with staff salaries being used as part of that or all of the cash match. And it was unclear to us whether that was actually following the guidance that was put forward in order to meet the requirements of TIFTIA.
Now, you mentioned indirect costs and in-kind contributions. Can you tell me more of that? Can you directly address what representation of that would be?
Sure. So indirect costs and in-kind contributions are the non-cash options that a state can use to help provide its portion of the program. So they could offer conference space for a meeting. They could use the utility of their travel offices to arrange overseas travel for some of these conferences. It's the different types of services that the state can provide that would not be something you'd see on a balance sheet, but could be valued in various ways by the states to meet their requirement.
And how do you monitor the...
Oh, thank you. The gentleman's time has expired, but we will, after this, allow for more
I yield
questions
back.
as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Now, the gentleman, Mr. Hagedorn from Minnesota, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair and the ranking member and the witnesses. Appreciate all the work done by staff, including my own. Thanks for putting this together. It's a timely hearing. This is National Agriculture Week, so anything we can do to help our farmers and agribusinesses, especially expand in the area of trade, is very important. And as somebody that's also sits on the Agriculture Committee, I have a vested interest in this in a number of ways. I mean, our farmers and agribusinesses, not just in southern Minnesota, where I represent that district, but across the country, many of them have been in recession one way or another for the better part of 5 years. We've had low commodity prices, high input costs, and all this predates anything with the trade issue. And so, what we try to do, at least my goals with agriculture and being here, 3 things for our farmers. Make sure that we can do everything possible to reform the federal government so we have good government policies in the areas of regulation, healthcare, taxes, energy, work requirements for welfare, whatever, to make sure that we drive down the cost of farming as much as possible and make sure that we have the workforce there for our farmers. Secondarily, we want to sustain our farmers when times are tough, and we do that with implementation of the 5-year Farm Bill, E15 year-round, things of that nature. And third, and this is the critical part where we have an opportunity at the federal government, the federal role, expand our exports, drop down those barriers, make sure that we have new markets around the world. In southern Minnesota, we have about 20,000 farms. It's a highly rural area, happens to also have the urban spot of Rochester, where we have the preeminent institution of medicine in all the world, Mayo Clinic, but mostly farms. A lot of good crop and livestock producers, second largest hog production congressional district in the whole country. And so each one of those farms, each one of those farmers is producing enough to feed about 165 people. And we see that reach is just across the country, not just across the country, but the whole world. And so when we get into what's going on with these programs and how they can be better utilized, do you think we should track closer as to how much of this money is spent on direct work trying to promote farmers and agribusinesses and our commodities? And secondarily, and I'll ask both of you, do you work closely with USDA to try to implement these things? Are there measures that we should take to make sure that we're not duplicating costs, but that we're using our monies as efficiently and effectively as possible?
You want me? Sure. I believe your first question was, should we track the farm, what goes to the farms differently?
Well, just how do you track the money? For instance, in Minnesota, we spent, I think it's like 150 grand, something like that. Do we track exactly what we're trying to do with those monies, or do you get to that level in your reports? Or?
So in my reports, we stayed programmatic in line with the mandate for us. We didn't go into exactly what the states were using the money for. I think.
Do you think
yours did, though?
Should we do more in that area of tracking the money, and what would that require? How would we get that done?
Well, it's a different scope of for us if we were to do that. Like the act says that we are supposed to look at X, Y, and Z. In order for us to do something like that, it would just be a different focus, a different scope. And if the member wanted to request of my office that we did something like that, we are definitely open to it.
Okay.
So when we started our work, as you know, we looked at the 12 states that used less than 75% of their allocation in 2015, 2016. And I'm just looking now at my statistics. Your home state, Minnesota, was actually the one that used only 23.3% of its 2015 STEP allocation. We did pursue possibly looking into the kinds of things that each STEP grant was used for, but because the IG identified some issues with the reliability of the data that SBA had, we were unable to do that. Now, anecdotally, when we spoke with the 12 different states, we did hear a number of different industries that were benefiting from the STEP program, such as heavy manufacturing, medical equipment, food and beverage, consumer appliances, that sort of thing, but that's purely anecdotal and can't be generalized. So we don't have specific information, but I did want to share that with you, that your state was one of the ones that we spoke with about the low use rate.
Well, that's very useful, and we'll follow up on that. I appreciate your testimony. I yield back.
Thank you. And now we'll actually go into a second round of questions. Lots to talk about here today. So I'll begin by recognizing myself again for another 5 minutes. And first question again to Ms. Giannopoulos. So according to your report, SBA told you that it does not formally facilitate the sharing of best practices between states. You recommend that SBA enhance its identification and sharing of best practices. How might this improve the program? And do you have any thoughts on how this can be achieved?
Well, we didn't specifically tell SBA how it should be achieved because we wanted them to work within the parameters and the resources that they had available to them. But there are a number of ways that we have issued in other reports some suggestions of how not only states but also agencies can share best practices and information. What the SBA officials told us is that they perhaps informally, anecdotally speak with a particular state regarding the difficulty it might be having in using its grant funds, but there's no systematic way. And when we spoke with the 12 states, they told us there's no systematic way that they can learn from each other than through outside organizations such as CITO and that sort of thing, to learn from each other what it is that's working or not working for a particular state. And we realize that every state's situation is a little bit different, but because the 12 states we talked to were so variable, they were small states, large states, urban and rural, all different in and of themselves, there should be some way that SBA could facilitate that sharing of information in order to better use the money and better achieve the program goals.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Mr. Ware, metrics are obviously a very valuable tool in measuring the success of a program, but they also let us know where to make improvements. How can we better measure the success of the program in terms of increasing exports and the number of small businesses that export?
Right. That's a good question. And I think it's a question that we asked based on our recommendations for SBA to do. And we believe that they have now done that in terms of addressing what the mandate was, which was to increase the small businesses that do export. As I think I said earlier, they were focused so much on the return on investment that was what was being reported. And as a matter of fact, that's what was mandated to be reported. What the body could possibly do is to, in the new version, is to make some of those measurements, the ones that they're now doing as a result of our recommendations, perhaps make those mandatory as well. That would tell, and on top of that, there's a lot of room out there for outcome-based recommendations, and there are other, like someone said, 6 other places that are doing this. So there should be best practices, like we were just discussing, out there on how best to measure this program if you're really focused on determining the true impact of the program in the states.
Great. Thank you. And I'll yield back the rest of my remaining time. And I would like to recognize again the ranking member, Dr. Joyce, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. We heard, this is for Mr. Ware. We heard earlier that the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands was awarded a STEP grant, and they were actually an ineligible recipient at that time. Testimony says that OIT personnel did not have the experience or training required to manage and administer such a complex grant program. What has SBA OIT done to ensure its staff is now fully understands STEP's statutory requirements?
So when at the time that happened, that was still in the pilot. So it was very much on the beginning. As a result of our recommendations, they did implement a training program and trained all the grant managers across the board. Now, that being said, keep in mind that it's not like contracting officers where they have a requirement to do annual training or anything like that. They did training at that time, and they have implemented steps to make sure that they provide the training going forward. And that's something that they're doing across the board for all the grant programs right now.
So along that same line, how are the states made aware and held accountable for the STEP's legal requirements? Is that training extended to individual states?
We did not look at the training to the individual states. However, the grant managers, from a systematic standpoint of SBA's oversight of the program, that was covered in the training.
This question is for Ms. Giannopoulos. Several states claim that STEP reporting requirements were much more detailed and burdensome than grants from the Department of Commerce and other agencies. Can you provide me with more details on this, please?
Well, what we heard from the 12 states that we interviewed is that some of the difficulties in using all of their funds had to do with the level of detail with which they had to report back the use of those funds or to ask for reimbursement. So, for example, one of the states told us that when a group of trade folks were traveling, say, to a conference, in order to request reimbursement of that money, if they were all in a cab together, they had to divide the cost of the cab and claim it individually by person, which made for that was only one example, a great deal of administrative burden for them. It made it very difficult, and in some cases, they were even second thinking they're applying for the grant the next year because of the amount of burden it was on them to request that money back. And in some cases, that money is such a small amount, even though it's important to them, they had to do a cost-benefit analysis as to whether it was worth their time in order to get that money back as part of the STEP grants.
Do you find that then states apply for less burdensome application process? Are they reaching out in other directions when facing such obstacles?
We didn't really get into a lot of detail with where they put their efforts, but because the size of the state trade offices varies so widely, the very small state trade offices have to make choices as to where they're going to put their time. And as I mentioned earlier, because this program doesn't follow a set standard routine every year, it's not available on the same day every year, it's not the same amount of time every year, they have to make those types of choices state by state by state as to what they're going to apply for and how they're going to use their resources.
Would you presume that they do reach out to less burdensome application processes?
I haven't talked with them about that, but if I were making a decision as far as what I was going to do with my resources and my time, I'd want the most bang for my buck.
Makes sense. Thank you both for your concise answers. I yield back my time.
Thank you. And thank you very much to both of you for being here today and for all that you do in your public service and taking out so much time of your schedules. So it really means a lot. And this was a very informative day. And Ms. Giannopoulos and Mr. Ware, again, we're very grateful. And as we've heard today, STEP offers many promising opportunities for entrepreneurs and farmers in Iowa and across the country to succeed. Over the past decade, STEP has grown from a 3-year pilot program to a permanent, successful program in SBA that, with some improvements, will be a critical piece of a trade assistant portfolio. I appreciate your work in identifying some of the systemic issues that we need to resolve, and it has led to significant improvements in the implementation of the law. But more work obviously needs to be done. In my role as the chairwoman of the Subcommittee on Rural Development, Agriculture, Trade, and Entrepreneurship, I know it's a mouthful, right? Or as I like to call it, the RATE Subcommittee. I look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to make much needed improvements in STEP. I'm committed to making the lives easier for small business owners in Iowa and across rural America so that they can grow their small businesses and better support their families and our rural communities. I would ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit statements and supporting materials for the record. Without objection, so ordered. And if there is no further business to come before the committee, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great job.
Well, hey, I'm really looking forward to this.
I as well.
We should really get together.
Let's set up a time to do that.